Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
It feels like breathing while drowning. As if your body is about to fall over because your chest is too heavy to carry it. Your eyes are burning and no amount of water can put out the fire. You can't move, and every action feels like a chore. Washing your hair becomes hard. You feel disgusting as the dirt builds up in your pores. Life becomes dirty, and you're desperate to feel clean again. This was what it felt like to lose a parent. It was the last thing my mother ever taught me. My mother died 4 years ago, and I crawled throughout my senior year to deal with it. When I finally got on my own 2 legs, I moved to Los Angeles for something new. After graduating from college in Connecticut, I needed a fresh start. I found Kayla Wu on a Facebook group for housing sublets in the LA area. Her posting said that she was looking for a roommate to add to the lease. It was $900 monthly with parking and an on-site washer and dryer. It seemed like a good deal. Kayla was short, in shape, with blonde streaks in her sleek black hair. She worked in finance. I envied her as I sat across from her in Starbucks. I wish I had my life together.
Where are you from?
She asked me. Connecticut, I responded, timidly taking sips from my overexpensive latte. Yourself? She looked up at me and smiled.
I'm American, if that's what you're wondering.
Oh, I just asked because you asked me, I quickly replied, choking on the liquid. I never thought you weren't American. I could feel my face growing hot and red. I hoped it wasn't visible.
What do you do for work? I have to make sure the girl that moves in here can pay her dues on time.
She said, less pleasantly. I just moved here and got a job at Garney's coffee shop in North Hollywood. I also have some savings while I look for a better paying job in my field. I looked down at my coffee as I waited for her to answer.
So you went to college? Good.
Kayla replied. She sniffed her coffee, which was weird, before drinking it. I could see the steam coming out from the top. I know my coffee was searing, which is why it was weird to see her gulping it down. No, not gulping. Slurping.
I like you, Olivia. I think you'll be a good fit. Do we have a deal?
She stood up and threw her coffee away before putting out her hand. Absolutely. I shook it. My father called me the next day. I told him how I had found housing. He usually calls every 2 days to check up on me. I felt bad for abandoning him on the East Coast, but I think we both needed space to live, breathe, and to grieve. The next weekend, I moved into my new room. Kayla wasn't home when I got there. She left my key under the doormat. My room was large and I had 2 big closets. I didn't have that much stuff with me. For the first time in a long time, I didn't think about my mom. I didn't feel everything. I felt normal, like myself again. I ordered a pizza and worked on my laptop until I heard the door open downstairs. Laughter filled the living room. I wiped my hands and went to greet my new roommate. I saw Kayla and some guy with blue hair hugging it out in the kitchen. Great, she has a boyfriend. Not.
Hey, Olivia,
she said, smiling, as if she wasn't sucking a dude's face right in front of me. I love the room, I said with enthusiasm.
It's a big room. Oh, Olivia, this is my friend Mark. Mark, this is my new roommate.
Mark put out his hand. I took it. His skin was cold. He was a good-looking guy, but he seemed somewhat out of place with her. I guess not her boyfriend? So Kayla liked to hook up. There were 2 large bags of food on the ground next to them.
We picked up Chinese.
Mark grabbed the bags and followed his nightly entertainment upstairs.
I'll see you later, Olivia. Let me know if you need anything.
Kayla yelled. That night, I lied in my bed, staring at the wall. I couldn't sleep. I heard noises coming from Kayla's room. Great. Here comes the jungle sex. I heard Mark moaning and Kayla screeching. I thought about the last time I had sex. It had been a while. My lady parts throbbed a bit. I felt weirded out that I was so turned on. Then, I heard the shouting. Damn, that must be a really good fuck. Then the shouting turned into screaming. What have I done? Is every night going to be like this? Mark was screaming. It didn't sound like pleasure anymore. I leaned up and walked over to my door, listening through the wood. The guy was literally screaming.
Stop it. Please. Please.
I heard through the door. What the hell was she doing to him? Then I heard something that I still don't understand. I heard slurping. The way a person slurps when they get to the bottom part of their drink. The way Kayla slurped that coffee at Starbucks. Disgusting. I held my breath and everything went quiet. Kayla's door opened and I quickly went back to my bed. I heard the shower pipe running. It must have been super messy. I was no longer turned on. Honestly, I was mortified. I closed my eyes and forced myself to sleep. This girl was crazy, and my excitement for my new place went away. Instead, I was filled with unease. The next morning, I awoke to the smell of breakfast. I was getting ready for work, so I couldn't talk for long. I showered, picked up my clothes, and headed downstairs. I saw Kayla flipping eggs on the stove.
Good morning,
she greeted. Good morning, I replied as I looked for my box of cereal on top of the fridge.
I hope we didn't keep you up last night. I'm sorry if we were loud.
I snorted. No, you were fine. I poured my cereal into a bowl and searched for the milk.
Would you like some?
She offered, pointing to the pan of eggs. No thanks, I responded, feeling awkward. I noticed something on her wrist. A deep scratch mark. Kayla noticed me looking and rolled up her sleeve, the smile fading away. Where's Mark? I asked.
He went home already,
she said, putting the eggs on a plate. Oh, will you see him again? I questioned as I tied my shoelaces.
No, he won't be coming back.
Kayla laughed. She took her plate of eggs to the table.
He was delicious, if you know what I mean.
In the corner of my eye, I saw something scurry underneath the sink. I bent down to take a look. It was a spider. I screamed and grabbed my shoe. Before I could squish it, Kayla was behind me, grabbing the shoe from my hand.
What are you doing?
She yelled angrily.
Move.
Kayla picked up the spider with her hand, her bare fucking hand, and put it outside.
In this house, we don't kill. We preserve,
she said coldly. Sorry, I just hate spiders. Kayla returned to her eggs.
They're just misunderstood.
I walked out of the house to my car. On my way to work, I noticed a flyer attached to a pole with a young man's face on it. He didn't look older than 20. The flyer stated he had gone missing a month ago. Great. I guess the neighborhood isn't that safe. As I walked into Garney's for my shift, I nervously fixed my apron around my waist. I'd been working here for a month as I stayed on a friend's couch. The shift manager, Alan, was into me. Honestly, I was into him. When the rush died down and we had some free time, I told him about my roommate, Kayla. I told him what I'd heard last night. He thought it was weird too.
Did you see him leave, or him?
Alan asked. No. A week later, on a night I was coming back home from my shift, I saw the lights on from the outside. I went to Target earlier to buy some Raid anti-spider spray. I hid it in my bathroom. Just the thought of any of those crawlers on me made me feel sick. As I opened the door, I heard laughing. Kayla was sitting at the table with a guy with red hair and freckles. A new guy already? Who even wants to have sex that much?
How was work, Olivia?
They were eating Indian food. At least she feeds the men she screws. Good, I responded tiredly. I took off my shoes and looked through the cabinet for some soup.
This is my friend Zach.
Zach got up to shake my hand. I took it and smiled back. Honestly, I was tired and annoyed. It appeared that Kayla's sexual escapades were going to be a normal occurrence, and I wasn't sure that I wanted to live with screams and moans every night, especially the screams that come from these men that sleep with her. It was terrifying. Kayla and Zach whispered to each other and headed upstairs.
Good night,
Zach said before following after his catch. But who was catching who? That night, I played music on my phone to drown out any sex noises. Everything seemed normal until the screams started. At first, it sounded pleasurable, but then they became animalistic, like a cornered animal trying to run away. Zach's screams became so scary that I got out of bed with my phone ready to call the police. I opened my door, just a crack. Nothing but our dark hallway. Until Kayla's door opened and Zach ran out screaming for his life. I saw his face. It looked changed, as if his flesh were melting off the bone. What the hell was I even seeing? I couldn't move. I saw his tendons and a piece of bone. Was that his eyeball falling to the floor?
Help me! Help!
Zach screeched, but his words became watery as he collapsed to the ground, turning into a blob of blood, purple and blue. I vomited in my mouth. Kayla came out of her room, but she was no longer the woman I met. She had spiky hair all over her skin and a large, engorged tongue that resembled a suction. Fangs! Kayla had fangs! With that tongue, she slurped up all the blood and flesh from the carpet. By the end, the fabric was white and perfectly clean. Her skin is going back to normal, and her fangs disappearing back into her mouth. I took a step back, and my floor creaked. Kayla looked at the direction of my room. I quickly closed the door and ran to my bed, pulling the covers over my face. I heard my door open. I heard her footsteps coming towards my bed. After a moment, the footsteps went back towards the hallway. Kayla's door closed. I didn't sleep that night. When the sun rose, I got up and started packing my bags. I was going to sneak out and head back east. Fuck this. I was in danger and all the adrenaline inside me was raging. I had to get out of here, but then something struck me. I had just seen a man get murdered and devoured alive. I understand now that that's what happened to Mark. She ate him. Kayla eats men. If I went back home, I would be safe. But what would happen to all the others who would come here thinking they'd scored? The way the flesh melted from his face. I vomited again just thinking about it. No one was going to save me. I had to save myself. But I had to save those men. That's something my mother taught me. A couple of days later, I saw one of my neighbors outside. I walked over to her and introduced myself. Her name was Angela, big-breasted and poorly dyed blonde hair. "It's nice to meet you," I said, trying not to gawk at her G-cups. "I was curious about the history of this place and my roommate. Do you know what happened to the person that used to live here before me?" Angela looked around first, and then leaned closer to me. "Don't say anything to your roommate, but you're like the 6th woman to move in here since she took over number 14. 6 other people have lived here?" "Yep," replied Angela. "It's funny, I've seen them all move in, but I've never seen them leave." I decided to let it go, to leave quietly without Kayla knowing that I knew her secret, that hopefully I would get out of that house alive, with all my belongings. If she ever found out that I knew, what would stop her from finding me, killing me, turning me into a blob of flesh and eating me? That night when I came home, she was already sitting in the living room with 2 young men who looked no older than my age. One of them had a crooked nose and the other had terrible acne.
How are you, Olivia?
She asked, as if she wasn't a man-eating, slurping, fang-toothed monster. I'm okay. I actually need to talk to you about something.
Can it wait until tomorrow?
She replied innocently. Sure, I responded.
Shall we go upstairs?
She gestured to the men. They both glanced at each other in glee. The men disappeared to her room. I watched them, probably and certainly, head towards their agonizing deaths. I could walk away, abandon my things and leave for home. I looked at the front door. So close. I can't let them die. Not like that. I grabbed a knife and headed upstairs to my room. I heard Kayla's bed shaking and I closed my door, waiting, ready for what was to come. Like clockwork, one of the men started screaming. I rushed out of my bedroom with the knife and opened Kayla's door. The man with the crooked nose was sitting in the corner, naked. The acne-filled man was a red blob on her bed. Kayla, fully transformed into her spiky self, glanced at me and grimaced before slurping it up.
You're just in time, Olivia.
What the fuck are you? I screamed. Kayla's smile disappeared as she slurped up the mushy remains of the man with acne. I'm pretty sure I saw a piece of pimple on the floor.
What do you mean? I am as human as you. I just have different tastes.
She responded, laughing. Yeah, misunderstood? Let him go. Let him go right now. I could feel my legs trying to collapse.
Or what? You're going to stab me with a knife?
She came towards me, quickly, unnaturally fast, and grabbed the knife. She threw it, and it landed perfectly straight into the man with the crooked nose's chest. Why did you have me live here? So you could eat me? I yelled.
I don't like women's flesh. The thing is, Olivia, I need you. Or rather, my babies do.
Every 6 months you kill your roommate?
Not right away. But once they hatch inside of you, that's usually when it happens. Slowly, painfully, and beautifully. You're part of the process.
I tried to run, but she was too quick. She picked me up and threw me across the hallway. I hit the wall. She picked me up and dragged me into my bathroom, and she pushed my head into the toilet. I couldn't breathe.
Just let it go, Olivia. You've lost, and I need your body.
With my left hand, I grabbed whatever I could reach. The Raid bottle. Without thought, I unscrewed the top and dumped it on her.
What the fuck?
She screeched. Kayla's skin was burning. I threw the rest of it at her face. She screamed. I grabbed the bleach next and dumped that too. Her body started to burn and melt in front of me, but she wasn't melting fast enough. She was about to come for me with her acidic body when the guy with the crooked nose appeared behind her. He pulled the knife out of his chest and stabbed her in the back. Kayla writhed in agony and deserved pain as she became a mesh of flesh. The man with the crooked nose fell and hit the ground, bleeding out. I called 911, but by the time the police arrived, there was a dead man and a pile of melted goop on the floor. I was never charged with the deaths. You see, what Kayla didn't know was that I've been here before. I am a pro at breathing while drowning. My chest has been heavy for years, and I can carry this fucked up moment. My eyes cannot forget the burning of human flesh or the slurping, but I can envision my future, knowing what I am capable of. Not enough showers can cleanse this blood from my hair, but I no longer feel the need to be clean. Life is dirty. That's something my mother taught me.
When you have been a priest for as long as I have, you start to notice patterns in people. When a parishioner approaches, I can already guess what they want to ask me by their body language, or the way their eyes flicker to meet mine. It's quite funny, actually. Everyone thinks they're unique, that somehow they're different than everyone else. Well, let me tell you, after 38 years of hearing confessions, I've come to the conclusion that we're all pretty much identical. If I have to listen to one more trembling voice confess to watching pornography, I just might lose my mind. I haven't turned cynical in my old age, just weary. When you hear the same sins repeated over and over again, 1,000,000,000 times over, you begin to wonder if there's any hope left for the human race. I guess that's where faith kicks in. Though now, I'm not so sure how much of that faith I still possess. You see, I don't practice anymore. I've given up the collar. I witnessed something that has shaken me to this day, and the shadow of its memory still haunts me. It was the last confession I ever did. I stifled a yawn, trying my best to remain awake, as another sobbing parishioner left the confessional. The whole process had just become so mechanical to me that I barely even heard what was being whispered on the other side of the screen. I adjusted the cushion under my rear, feeling the familiar ache that had only gotten worse as my years advanced. I checked my watch and saw I still had another 20 minutes to go. I closed my eyes and offered it up to the Lord, begging Him to fill me with patience for these people. I heard the familiar creak of wood on the other side of the screen as yet another sinner took their place. I ran a hand over my weary eyes and then spoke into the screen. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, I recited, making the sign of the cross. A male voice whispered to me from the other side, "Forgive me, Father. Father, for I've sinned. This is my first confession." I shifted the cushion beneath me, annoyed at the distraction, and tried my best to focus on the man. "Do not be afraid, my son. Tell the Lord what you have done." The man said nothing for a moment, his voice rasping behind the screen. "Father, I don't think there's any hope for me. I've done so much." I sat up a little straighter. "My son, there is no sin too great for God." The man struggled to keep his emotions in check, his voice straining. "I think I've broken every rule in the book. Murder, deception, lust." The mention of murder sent a cold icicle shooting up my back. "You killed someone?" I asked, voice hardening. This was a serious confession, one I had never heard before in all my years in the booth. I could hear the man begin to fall apart, shame and grief washing his words in sorrow. "I've killed so many people." My heart was racing in my chest. "Who have you killed? When was this?" The man sniffled. "It was a long time ago. I've been on the run for so long. I don't know what to do anymore. My whole life is a lie. One big fake advertisement for something I'm not." I leaned into the screen, voice stern. "Have you thought about turning yourself into the police? Coming clean will surely ease the weight of your sins. I can hear it in your voice. You're suffering." The man started crying. "You have no idea." I knew I had to be delicate here. "Son, the Lord's love is endless. He can forgive you these transgressions if you show Him how truly sorry you are." The man surprised me by barking a laugh. His love is not endless. I swallowed, treading carefully. I know it's hard to understand, to accept, especially when you're feeling so low. But hear me. Nothing is too great for the Lord. His wisdom and love for you is deeper than the oceans, broader than the universe, and he wants you to know that, to feel that in your soul. The man was recovering, and he snorted behind the screen. You couldn't be more wrong. Slightly frustrated, I pressed him. What makes you say that? Suddenly, the man's voice filled the entire booth. A deep rumble that shook me to the very core of my soul. Because I am your lord. I blinked, my head spinning. This was new. Just what kind of person was I dealing with here? I suddenly realized that the mental state of this person could be seriously compromised. After a moment, I decided to play along a little longer. You're the Lord. I can hear you doubt. I sniffed. Well, forgive me if I'm a little cautious around someone who proclaims they're the Son of God. There is no Son of God, the man said, irritated. Just me. You guys made up all that Jesus bullshit. I had nothing to do with that. My mind was spinning as I tried to keep up. Okay, so who are you, really? And what are you doing in my confessional? The man exhaled. I just told you who I am, and I'm here to make peace before I die, or whatever happens to me afterwards. I don't really know how I die. I never thought about it before. I decided it was time to start steering the ship back on course. When a soul dies in the good graces of God, it gets sent to heaven. The man laughed. No. You're wrong. You're all wrong. What are you talking about? I asked, feeling anger begin to stir in my chest. The man's voice dropped low. Heaven is fucking gone. I cocked an eyebrow, the seriousness in his voice giving me pause. What do you mean, gone? His tone remained the same, a low rumble. It got wiped out a long time ago. There is nothing left. For reasons unexplainable, I began to feel uneasy, a sinking dread that was just beginning to form in my stomach. How is that possible? God is almighty. The devil can never best him, I said. The man slammed his hand against the wall, causing me to jump. There is no devil. There never was. I don't know where you people got that, but it wasn't from me. There is just myself and heaven. No angels, no saints, nothing. I created a place for you, and I created a place for me. Then I sat around and watched my creations, all from the comfort of my home, my heaven. Every once in a while I'd poke my finger in and stir up some shit, cause a disaster or something, just to see how you'd react. If heaven is gone, where do our souls go when we die? I asked. I have no idea, the man said. I don't even know if you have a soul. I certainly didn't give you one. Why would I? I made you so I could have something to do. When you die, 3 more people will take your place, and I watch the circus go round and round. I have to say, I'm impressed with the human race. Y'all have really come a long way. I never dreamed you'd create such wonders. Something outside the booth in the sanctuary crashed, but I ignored it, the man drawing all my attention. Why are you here? I repeated, mind blanking at the absurdity of what I was hearing. The man's voice turned quiet, an edge of unease now. Because I'm going to die soon. I can't hide down here much longer. They know where I am. They're getting so close. Who? The man collected himself before whispering. The old horns. I could hear the shuffling of feet echoing outside the booth, as people began to leave, probably annoyed at the long confessional. But I didn't care. Something about this man held me and terrified me. I am not following, I said, a worm of unease snaking up my stomach into my chest. I thought you said there was just you and us. I thought you said the devil didn't exist. He doesn't, the man hissed. There is something else entirely. I have no idea what they are or where they came from. The logical part of me begged to end this conversation, but I couldn't let it go. What do they want with you, the old horns? Fear entered the man's voice. I don't know. They just showed up in heaven one day, taking me completely by surprise. They destroyed everything. Their power and wrath was more furious than anything I've ever seen before. I had no choice. I ran. You ran and came to Earth? I asked. I had to, he said. Where else is there to go? I don't know anywhere else but your world and mine. I have no clue where these entities came from or how they found me, but there's no stopping them. They'll be here soon. I can't hide forever. I exhaled, trying to collect my thoughts. Okay, so say hypothetically this is all true. Why would you come here to confession? If you're God, what do you need to apologize for? The man was silent for a moment and then said softly, Isn't this what you're supposed to do before you die? Truth be told, I had no idea what will happen to me when they catch up. But I'm scared. I'm really, really scared. I've done a lot of bad things, and this just seemed like the right thing to do. He trailed off miserably. I'm not the all-loving, wonderful God humanity thinks I am. I've done things to you people that sicken me. I don't know why I did them, but I did. You can look back on history and probably pick out the events I had a hand in. They're pretty obvious. You know how people always say, why would God let that happen? Well, it's because I'm an asshole. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry for all the shit I've made you people go through. You didn't deserve it. I kept pushing the envelope and you Christians never lost faith in me. You would find ways to make sense of it all, always giving me the glory. Oh, shit, I'm so sorry. I didn't say anything, the weight of his words collapsing in on me like the walls of a cave, trapping me in their conviction. How could I believe any of this? It was nonsense. Yet. Another crash echoed in the sanctuary, and this time I took notice because it filled the silence. Oh, no. I heard the man whisper, fear stirring his voice. What's wrong? I asked quietly. I heard the shuffle of a curtain and then the creak of the wood. They're here. I swallowed hard. Who? The old horns. Something dropped into the pit of my stomach, and I was suddenly very on edge. I leaned forward, one hand resting on the curtain in front of me. "Don't open it. Do not look at them," the man hissed. "Why?" I whispered, my voice unsteady now. "Just don't," he said urgently. "My time here is done. I'm at the end of my road. Stay in your booth until you hear silence again. It will be safe then." "This is insane," I whispered. "There's nothing out there." The man leaned into the screen, his voice earnest. "I know I have no right to ask you of this, but please, have faith in me one last time." My hand remained frozen, my sweaty fingers plastered to the curtain. I was paralyzed, torn between the madness of his story and the horrific sinking feeling I felt in my chest. "Please," the man begged now, "absolve me of my sins, and I'll leave you all alone, forever." Voice shaking, mind spinning, I released the curtain and turned to the screen. Something moved outside the booth, a scraping sound across the marble floors. I made the sign of the cross, voice trembling. "I absolve you of your sins. Go in peace." The man exhaled heavily, relief filling him. "Thank you, Father. Thank you." Suddenly a noise blasted through the church, so loud I had to cover my ears, my heart leaping into my throat. It was the blast of a low horn, a long single note that rattled me to the bone. As the sound faded, a drop of sweat ran down my face. What in the hell? "It's time," the man said. "Wait!" I cried, pressing my face against the screen. "Don't go out there, please." The man's voice softened. "Maybe this is how it was supposed to be. I never sent someone to die on a cross for your sins, but I do love you. I love all of you, and I can't thank you enough for keeping me company all these years. You truly are an incredible people. God bless, Father." And then I heard the curtain rustle as he stepped out into the sanctuary. His footsteps echoed away from me, and I slammed my hands over my ears again as another horn sounded. My breath blew sour across my tongue, and I sat panting, waiting, sweat rolling down my spine. I heard the man speaking to something, but I couldn't understand him. His voice muffled. My hands clenched my pants, and every part of me screamed to look. But I resisted, teeth grinding together as I squeezed my eyes shut. I began to count in my head, desperately needing to focus on something. 1, 2, 3, 4. Another ear-splitting horn sounded off. The low tone, so loud I heard the confessional booth creak against the blast. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I opened my eyes. I had just felt something change, something in the air, a shift in energy, a draining of something that was no longer there. I sat, panting for a few moments longer, and then let out a long breath, releasing the tension I had been holding inside of me. Cautiously, I reached out and grasped the curtain in front of me. I stood, my old bones sighing, and dragged a shaking hand across my brow. I opened the curtain, and the sanctuary stood empty. Not long after that, I gave up the cloth. I just couldn't do it anymore. Something about that day shook me to the very essence of my being. I've discussed the event with a couple other priests, and they just don't understand. I don't blame them. When I recite my story, it sounds like the ramblings of a madman who would alter their life so drastically based on one interaction, especially considering the circumstances. But I have, and I don't regret it. Something about prayer just feels so empty now. I don't know what's going to happen when I die, in truth. No one does. But what I do know is what I felt that day inside the confessional. That was real. When I strip away everything else, all the questions, the oddities, the twist in my gut is what remains. I can't explain what I witnessed. I can't rationalize the bizarre sounds I heard. I can't reenact the conviction I heard in that man's voice. But it was there, and it was real. And that is what I have put my faith into.
Bert set his drink down on the end table beside his recliner and stared towards the window. Without looking, he lifted the remote and muted the television. He thought he heard movement on the porch. It had happened before and turned out to be a raccoon or a possum. Not many people come by out here in the middle of the woods, and that was exactly the point. Bert was an introvert, to put it mildly, and being in a residential neighborhood, even a quiet one, felt like too much. People always felt inclined to show up at your door, banging and ringing and demanding attention. They wanted to sell you things or convert you to their religion or get you to join their church or find out where someone else lived or any manner of other thing. Bert found a house that was close enough to the real world that he could join it when he needed to, and far enough away that people didn't care to venture there just to sell you a vacuum or ask you if you've read the book in their hand. Now, if he talked to someone, it was his own choice, and one he rarely made. Every time he heard something on the porch, it activated his anxiety. Silently, he begged for it not to be a human being. Bert heard the sound again more clearly now that the TV wasn't blasting a heartfelt cop drama. It sounded like footfalls far too big to be a critter like those he was used to. Maybe it's a bear, he thought. He supposed it could be any manner of thing out here. What if it's Bigfoot? He's clearly an introvert too. We should be able to share these woods just fine. Bert stood slowly and bent over, trying to get a look out the window, but the curtains he put in to block the view from outside were now working against him. He bit his lip and quietly grumbled. He crept towards the door, stopping to listen every few steps. It was quiet now, and he was beginning to wonder if maybe his mind had been playing tricks on him. Then he heard it again. There was definitely someone out there. Why? Why would they come up the long, steep gravel drive through the woods and bother me? What could they possibly want? Bert wanted to scream, "Go away, not interested." But if he did, then they would know for sure he was home and he wouldn't be able to hide out of sight until they went away. He moved to the window and tried to gently move the curtain so he could peer out without being too obvious. He couldn't see anyone, so he stood there, listening. His breath quickened and his heart raced. He started to chew on his fingernail. Bert knew they hadn't left because he would have heard them. Their footsteps were pounding on his porch, and he never heard them walk off of it. Shoo! Go! Get! Bert stepped as quietly as he could and made his way to a different window where he peered out the curtain just the same. He still couldn't see well, but he saw enough to know that he had been right. From where he was, he could see a sleeve and a hand. It looked like a masculine hand from his best guess. Bert's fingers started drumming on his lips. Not hairy enough to be Bigfoot. Too bad. Something banged against the door and Bert jumped. His eyes went wide. Had they just knocked extraordinarily hard, or was the man on the porch actually trying to get in? Bert didn't know if he should try to say something, to let them know that someone lived here, or if he should go hide somewhere. Could whoever they are think that this house was abandoned? It didn't look abandoned. It was clean and tidy, and there was a car in the garage that he had admittedly rarely used, but it was there nonetheless. There were curtains on the windows and lights on, and moments ago a television was playing loudly. Surely they know someone is living here? Is this a home invasion? The bang came again and Bert jumped. He didn't know what to do and he started pacing. He could call the police despite how little he wanted to talk to them, but even if he did, it would take them 30 minutes on a good day to get there and he could be dead by then. Maybe the person on the porch wouldn't know that, and he could convince them that the police were on the way. If they were up to something illegal, that might be enough to scare them away. Should I yell? I should yell. Bert wanted to make sure he could protect himself if the plan went awry before he tried speaking, so he hurried to the kitchen for a knife. As he did, the person threw their weight into his front door again, and Bert cringed and twitched. His head was tucked down between his shoulders now. He grabbed a steak knife and scurried back into the other room, jumping again as the door was once again hit from the other side. "Whoever you are," Bert said, trying his best to sound far more confident than he was, "I've called the police, so you should go now. I don't know what you want, but the cops will be here any minute." "I didn't know anyone was in there," a voice said from the other side of the door, confirming Bert's suspicions that the stranger was a man. "Do this the easy way, and just let me in." Bert's mouth fell open and he shook his head. He licked his lips. His mouth felt uncomfortably dry. No, I'm not going to do that. I don't want you to come in. You need to leave." The door banged again and Bert bit down on his own hand to keep from screaming. "The cops are coming. Do you want to go to jail?" Bert hoped that he didn't sound as afraid to the man outside as he did to himself. He gasped when the window beside the door shattered inward and scattered glass shards all over the floor. He watched in absolute terror as an arm came through and felt for the door lock. Bert watched the masculine hand with a star-shaped scar by the thumb feeling around bore away to gain entry. He felt frozen, rooted to the ground. He couldn't even understand how this could be happening. "I should be safe out here. It's called off the beaten path for a reason." Then it occurred to him that he held a knife. With a deep breath and a nod of confidence, Bert ran forward and sliced at the hand coming through his window. The blade was serrated and dug in with its silver teeth, pulling and tearing the flesh. The man outside cursed but continued his efforts. Bert cringed as he stared at the bleeding hand, grasping at his doorknob through the crackle of broken glass. His own hands tensed like claws and scratched at the air. He couldn't breathe. "Who the hell are you?" Bert tried again. He stabbed at the hand this time, pushing the jagged blade through the meat and bone and tacking it to the door with a wet thunk. His eyes widened in panic. That wasn't going to get rid of the person on the porch. I just attached them to my house. I don't want them attached to my house. I want them gone. Damn it! Just open the door. That really hurt, the voice from outside commanded. "No!" Bert called back. He struggled to pull the knife free as it seemed to be caught on a bone or tendon, and his stomach spasmed with the threat of vomiting as the blood shot out in his direction upon its eventual release. He made a gagging sound and backed up a step as the man on the other side of the door issued a growl. "Go away!" The wounded hand retracted and Bert sighed with relief, though he was still trembling. "That's right. Go." He stood there and listened intently. Bert almost cried when he failed to hear any retreating footsteps heading away from his home. Why won't he leave? I just stabbed you, for God's sake. Go away. The door banged again and again. It kept going now, an all-out assault. Bert backed up until he bumped into his recliner and fell backwards over it. He landed half on and half off the cushion and slid to the floor just as the door came crashing inward. Bert didn't hold the scream back this time as the man stepped over the threshold into his house. The guy looked to be in his late 20s or early 30s. He was thin and tall, lanky with long platinum blonde hair and a zip-up hooded sweatshirt. He wore jeans and work boots, and his hand was still bleeding in thin streams that were staining Bert's carpet. He raised a single eyebrow and looked at Bert strangely when he saw him there on the floor beside his recliner. "What do you want?" Bert asked him. The stranger sighed. "Right now, I want you to use that recliner to block the new broken door before the people trying to kill me get here and walk their happy asses in here unattested." Bert scratched at his neck and face. "There are more people coming? Here? Why?" He shook his head. This wasn't supposed to be happening. It shouldn't be happening. Why is this happening? "Fine, I'll do it myself," the stranger said. He grabbed the recliner and started dragging it across the carpeted floor. Bert jumped away and scurried across the floor on all fours. He reached the far wall and leaned his back against it. He pulled his knees up to his chest and watched as this person he had never met before angled the recliner and jammed it under the doorknob. "Do you have any duct tape?" the man asked Bert. "I need it for my hand that you so kindly stabbed, and it would be a good idea to use something to patch up this window. At least slow them down for a second." Bert looked up at the man in disbelief. "You just forced your way into my house." The stranger threw his arms up. "What did you want me to do? Wait for an invitation? I didn't really have time for that. Now, come on. Duct tape?" Bert blinked a few times. "There's a toolbox above the washer to the left just off the kitchen," he said solemnly. "There should be some in there. Please don't use it on me. God, please don't let him use it on me." "Fantastic," the man said. "Why don't you stand up and guard that door again? You could stab the actual bad guys when they show up." He didn't wait for a response before marching through the house to follow the directions Bert had given him. Actual bad guys? So who the hell is he? The good guy? Bert couldn't breathe. He felt like someone was standing on his chest. This was a nightmare. He couldn't believe it was happening, but he did force himself to get to his feet, and he stared at the blood-stained door waiting for it to jostle with another bang of someone trying to get in. Will that recliner really hold them? Should I add something to it? The man returned from the kitchen with his hand wrapped in silver. He was carrying the roll of tape and Bert's baking sheet pans. Bert watched in horrified silence as the man taped the metal pans over the broken window. He listened to the sound of the tape stretching and tearing over and over like a screeching bird. "Who are you?" Bert asked when he could find his voice. "Tolliver," he said. He left the silver-coated window and crossed the room to stare into the wall mirror. "Jesus, I look terrible," he said, tugging at the skin beneath his eyes. "I should have checked myself while I was in your kitchen, but I was too focused on getting this place defended. Do you have any raw meat, steaks, or anything like that? The bloodier, the better." Bert slowly shook his head from side to side. "No, I'm a vegetarian. Guess you broke into the wrong house, jerk." Tolliver groaned. "Of course you are. My luck is just awful." "Sorry," Bert said, and he couldn't believe he was saying it. He just wanted this man to leave his house. "There may be some cold pizza in the fridge that you could heat up in the microwave. Take it. Have all of it." Tolliver exhaled with a huff. "Well, it won't help anything, but it certainly won't hurt anything either. Who doesn't love pizza?" Bert watched as the man walked by him and briskly made his way to the kitchen. He came back a moment later with a slice of pizza that he hadn't bothered to microwave. He took a bite and wiped the grease off of his mouth with the back of his hand. "Is this garlic Parmesan Alfredo? It's fantastic. I love garlic." "Me too," Bert said, not knowing what else to say. "What do you want from me?" Tolliver threw his pizza crust on the ground. "I want you to get up and help me fortify this place so we can both survive the night. Do you think you can do that?" Bert eyed the crust on the floor and then looked up at the man that had broken into his home. "No." "No?" "I am out here because I don't like people. I don't like conversations and interactions. It causes me anxiety, and you broke into my house, forced your way in, and are bringing more people here. I'm not going anywhere." Tolliver stared down at him with stern, angry eyes. "Listen, not if, but when the people chasing me get here, if we can't keep them out, you're going to die." Bert glared back. "Why? Why me? I just want to be left alone. Why can't I do that?" "Wrong place, wrong time, wrong dietary choices," Tolliver said. He started walking around and checking the locks on the windows. Bert didn't understand the dietary comment, and he didn't care. He just wanted this to be over. He wanted to ask if he could just leave and let this man have his house, but he knew Tolliver would want to leave with him. It seemed the intruder didn't realize Bert had a car as of yet. If he played his cards right, maybe he could get to it without Tolliver realizing. Sighing, Bert got to his feet. "Tell me what to do." Tolliver was heading back towards the kitchen, and he stopped and looked back at Bert. "If you have a gun, get it. I'm getting the rest of your tools. Maybe we can nail the windows shut or fix that door before they show up." Bert snorted. "If I had a gun, do you think I would have tried to bite you off with a steak knife?" "In my circle, it would make sense, but fine. Just keep an eye out for people and call me if you see anyone coming." Bert didn't respond. He watched Tolliver stomp off, and then he went to the door as asked, but he had his own ideas. Bert did his best to be quiet as he tugged the recliner out from under the doorknob. He eased it onto the floor and then looked over his shoulder, checking for Tolliver. When he didn't see him, he gently turned the knob and opened the door, cringing when it squealed and doing his best not to think about the other man's blood that had coated the knob and was now greasing his palm. Once it was open, Bert threw caution to the wind and ran out onto the porch, down the steps and around the drive for the garage. There was someone standing by the door. They wore a button-down shirt with a western bolo tie, black jeans and matching boots, and a cowboy hat. Bert's eyes widened and he skidded to a halt. "Oh, you gotta be kidding me." The man took notice of him and started his way. Bert gasped and spun on his heel. Two more men, both in long overcoats and hats that shadowed their faces, were making their way up the drive towards him. No. Bert didn't know what to do. If he went back inside, he would be safe from these people for the time being, but he would be stuck in there with the madman that broke his door and invaded his home. If he tried to get past the man by his garage, he could fail and die, but if he succeeded, he could get to the car. It seemed the better option. A voice drew his attention, and Bert turned with a start to find a woman clad in black with equally dark hair tied in a ponytail standing nearby, leaning on a tree with one arm. "Where is it? Is it inside?" she said to him. "It? What? Am I supposed to know what she's talking about?" There were too many of them. It felt like they were everywhere. How many more were out there in the trees or still coming? Bert couldn't breathe. His eye caught a glint of something at the woman's hip, and he looked that way. There was a long blade hanging from a leather strap attached to her belt. These people were armed. Tolliver was right. He was going to die today. I wish I knew why. "Answer the question," the man by the garage said, walking his way. "Is it in the house?" Bert was trembling. This was too many people, too fast, too much danger and stress, just too much. His eyes danced between them all. Then he made his decision and he turned and ran away from them, charging back up the steps and into the house. He slammed the door and hurried to wedge the recliner back in place. Bert felt before he saw that Tolliver was staring at him. When he turned and actually did gaze upon the other man, he thought, "He looks pissed." Bert frowned. "They're here," he said. "At least 4 of them. Maybe more. Probably more. I don't know." "Move," Tolliver told him. There was no time to fix the door, so he tried to seal it with the remainder of the roll of duct tape. "Why are they after you?" Bert asked from behind him. "What did you do?" Tolliver laughed but didn't look back at him. "Do? I existed. That's what I did. Even in 2022, some people are not so open-minded and progressive as we'd like to believe." "I think they called you it," Bert said. "I'm sure they did. That's precisely my point. Do you have any other weapons than the steak knives in this house? You're in the woods, for God's sake. Don't you need weapons?" "Again, vegetarian. I don't hunt or hurt animals." Tolliver slapped himself in the forehead. He rubbed at his eyes. "I'm just trying to make sure that neither of us dies here tonight. You don't have a wood-cutting axe or something? Anything I could use. A little help." "Help I can't give," Bert said with obvious frustration. "You have my kitchen knives and my hammer. That's what I've got. I don't plan for home invasions." "We know you're in there," a voice called from outside. Tolliver growled and Bert curled in on himself. Bert wondered if he was inside his house with the good guy or the bad guy in this situation. His teeth looked sharp just now, like he filed them or something. "Please be the good guy." "You've got to have something," Tolliver said. "You don't have a baseball bat?" "Do I seem like someone who plays baseball? I want to be alone, not on a team." "Not everyone who owns a baseball bat plays baseball," Tolliver snarled. He whirled to face Bert as something slammed against the front door behind him. "Why of all houses did I have to break into the weaponless vegetarians? Huh?" Bert scoffed at him. This was exactly why he hated being around people, why they caused him such anxiety. This man was angry at him for not being a convenient enough victim for his liking. "Maybe it's your own fault," he said snidely. "Maybe you should blame yourself for choosing the house in the middle of the woods instead of a house somewhere in the suburbs. Maybe people living in seclusion are there for a reason. Maybe—" Something shattered the window to his right, but the duct tape over the glass held. It flexed inward but didn't snap. Bert jumped and shivered. He should have called the police when he had the chance. If he had known then that more people would be coming behind the first, he would have. They will be getting in here soon. If I call the police now, they will arrive in time to find my body. This is one of the downsides to living in the middle of nowhere. But I didn't think I would need the police out here. I thought that was one of the benefits. I didn't think anyone would even know I was out here, never mind to bother me. I thought I would just be contesting with the raccoons." Bert watched his fingers work their way through the duct tape and tugged at it, trying to create an opening. He watched as Tolliver gracefully and casually strode over and grabbed those fingers in his right hand. He used one of Bert's kitchen knives, a non-serrated butcher knife in his left hand, to saw through them. It was slow and loud, the stainless steel grinding when it hit bone, but Tolliver forced his way through, snapping tendons like rubber bands until the digits plopped to the ground one by one. Bert just looked on in horror as the person on the other side of the duct-taped window screamed and struggled, thrashing and creating a rolling wave of silver. The fingerless hand was gushing downward, a wave of crimson further ruining Bert's carpet. Bert put a hand to his mouth, trying to keep his bile down. He couldn't take his eyes off of the fingers on the carpet, but he did when he felt Tolliver staring at him. "I did what I had to do, and there's going to be a lot more of that. You need to put your big boy pants on and focus on survival." Bert took a deep breath. "Well, that's classically toxic," he said. "Someone isn't less of a man if they're not cool with violence and murder." Tolliver grabbed a handful of Bert's shirt. Bert's eyes rolled down to look at the blood that still stained the hands that held his shirt, and he grimaced. "Seriously?" Tolliver snarled as something banged against the front door again, moving the recliner pinned against it. "I'm beginning to think I need to change my tactic and just kill you." Bert was taken aback by the statement. He blinked several times. "Well, I'm glad that wasn't in your original game plan. So what exactly was your plan? Tolliver huffed and released him. He spun to look at the already broken window by the door. The baking sheet was being pushed inward. The tape fixing it to the sill wouldn't last forever. It was already starting to give. My plan has always been to survive, but it was also to remain human. Bert bit back his smartass retort. Did the intruder mean that killing him made him less than human? Perhaps he is one of those talk show crazies who thought he was a space alien. Maybe I'm going to find out if the moon is full tonight. He couldn't help but think about the people outside referring to Tolliver as it. Finally, he said, "How?" "By surviving without it. Without you," Tolliver said. The metal pan broke free. It was still attached to the tape, but it hung limply by the window's side. Bert stared fearfully at the man on the other side, gun in hand, pointing through the window, a grim look upon his face. Tolliver moved faster than Bert would have thought possible. He flinched and looked away as his own hammer was brought down upon the wrist of the hand that held the gun. The man cried out, and Bert heard the gun clatter to the floor. He couldn't resist the urge to look back at the unfolding scene, but he regretted it when he actually did. Bert turned to look just as Tolliver jammed a steak knife into the man's throat and a geyser of crimson erupted, splashing Bert in the face. He cried out as the dead man fell away past the open window. "I thought killing wasn't in the plan," Bert said, feeling sick. "Killing you wasn't in the plan," Tolliver said back as he bent to retrieve the gun from the floor. "These vermin won't leave me alone if I don't kill them. They definitely all need to die." Bert gave a long exhale as he wiped blood and bits of flesh from his eyes and mouth. He could taste the metallic, coppery flavor in his stained mouth, and it made him feel sick. "Well, okay then. Glad you found a more suitable weapon. I'm going to retire to my bedroom if you don't mind. I want to be out of the path of any more flying fluids." "I do mind. You stay by me." Tolliver looked at him and Bert took a step back. The man's face and hoodie had been hit by the blood spray as well. It gave him a wild, animalistic look. Bert wanted to argue, but he wasn't going to argue with the man covered in the blood of his enemies. "And don't look at me like that. Can you give me a towel or something to wipe it off?" It took Bert a second to register what the man had actually asked him. "I thought you said stay by you. Make up your mind." "Oh, yeah, right, of course," Bert said. He ran to the bathroom. The bathroom window was pushed open, and there was an arm hanging in when he got there. Bert yelped and started beating at it wildly. The person the arm belonged to cussed, and the arm pulled back. Bert snagged a towel off of his rack and hurried back to the living room to find the woman he had seen outside laying on the floor. Her head turned at an awkward angle, and her bulbous, protruding eyes were now staring at nothing. Her neck bulged, a stray chunk of severed vertebrae breaking through the skin like it was trying to escape. Bert was staring at her as he extended the towel to Tolliver. "Is she—" "Yes." Bert looked up to see Tolliver wipe his face. "I guess I can just buy a new towel," Bert thought. What he said was, "Someone was coming through in the bathroom." Tolliver sighed. "I can't watch all the entry points. You have to help me. Can you shoot if you did have a gun?" "You're going to give me the gun? The gun that belonged to a killer? That has probably been used in a million crimes, and I'm going to get my fingerprints all over? Not to mention I could just shoot you with it." Tolliver rolled his eyes. "You wouldn't be foolish enough to try to shoot me with it after seeing what happened to the last guy." Bert reached out and accepted the gun. "Fair point," he said. "Dad taught my brother and I to shoot young. I haven't done it in a long time because I don't like guns and what they bring to the world, but I know how." "Touching story," Tolliver said. "Just face the bedroom, and anyone you see, shoot." Bert shook his head. "If I do, it'll be in the arm or leg or something. I'm not like you. I can't." Bert looked down at the dead woman's fat tongue lolling out the side of her mouth like a golden retriever on a car ride that got stung by a bee. do that. Whatever makes you happy, Tolliver said. Just know that they won't give the same courtesy. Why? Why is any of this happening? Tolliver sighed. Some people don't believe in progress. They think people are what they are, and that's all they'll ever be. They don't give anyone the chance to change, and if someone does change, they work their asses off to prove the person didn't change at all. Bert raised an eyebrow. I'm assuming the person in this incredibly vague story is you, so I might die because of cancel culture? I'm in the woods. I tried to cancel myself. What are a group of armed killers trying to prevent you from changing? Do they want to prove that you're still a killer because... Tolliver shook his head. He pulled a necklace from his shirt and held a cross emblem in his hand. God is testing me, he said, closing his eyes and kissing it. He led me to you as a test of my willpower. Bert saw movement go past the broken window and he raised the gun and fired. The shot was loud and sheetrock exploded. Tolliver flinched and looked at him like he had gone mad. You missed them and almost hit me, he said. Switch. Bert looked at the steak knife the man was holding out to him and he shook his head. I feel better with the gun. Well, we know you know how to use the steak knife because you nailed my damned hand to the door. Just take it and give me the gun. No. A gunshot came from behind Bert from way of the bedroom. It sliced through his shoulder and chipped away at the wall beside Tolliver's head. Tolliver snarled in response, dropped to one knee and hurled the steak knife. Bert, holding his shoulder, spun around in time to see the steak knife embed itself between a stranger's shocked eyes, a thin line of red running past the bridge of his crooked nose. He dropped to the ground with a hard thump. I told you to watch the damn bedroom, Tolliver growled from behind him. You also told me to give you the gun. Now I've been shot. Tolliver grabbed him hard and yanked him closer, tugging his injured arm for a better look. Bert yelped in pain. Tolliver inspected the wound and then pushed him back. It's little more than a cut. You'll live. Still hurts, Bert said bitterly. I'll watch the bedroom, but you gotta move the body. Tolliver snarled and lunged at him. He squeezed his hands into fists. Move it yourself if you want it moved. I'm this close to ripping your throat out and becoming the monster these people want me to be. I will bleed you dry. Well, that's really freaking nice. Bert really wanted to fire off back at him, but he was smart enough to realize that he was pushing the man too far. The guy was obviously dangerous. He had proven that well enough already. Bert bit his tongue, tucked the gun into his pants, and walked over to the body on the floor of his bedroom. Doing his best not to look at it, he grabbed a limb and dragged it around behind his bed where it was out of sight. He went to move back when he heard a click and the quietly spoken word, "Don't." Bert froze. A chill ran through him and made him tremble. "Please don't kill me," he said quietly. "Do you know what that is? That you're hiding and helping?" The voice whispered into his ear. "Do you understand what is waiting for us both in the other room?" "I know he's a killer, but are you any better?" Bert said. "All of you broke into my house." Bert immediately shut his eyes and kicked himself for being so bad at keeping his mouth shut. "This is one reason I don't interact with people. I'm no good at it. My filters don't work as well as other people's. Part of being an ass pie, I suppose." "What's going on in there?" Tolliver called from the other room. Bert almost sighed with relief when he realized that Tolliver wouldn't be coming. He couldn't abandon the broken window and door. "Hurry up and get back. I said to stay by me." "Tell the monster you're fine," the voice said into Bert's ear, something hard pressed against his head to drive the point home. Bert licked his lips and took a deep breath. "Nothing," he called back to Tolliver. "Watching this bathroom window. It's wide open now." Good, the voice said from behind him. Now I'm going to back up, and I want you to slowly head for that bathroom window. Go out of it. If you run in any direction, I'll put you down like a rabid dog. Bert swallowed the lump that had risen in his throat, and he nodded. If we find that you're aiding him, or worse, that you're like him, we'll come for you next. If you really are just caught up in this, you'll be safe and free to go once you're outside. Bert felt the person behind him move away. He swallowed again and turned towards the bathroom very slowly, his eyes rolling to the side for a glance at the man that held him at gunpoint. He couldn't get a look. A loud crash sounded from the other room and was followed by a series of thumps and bangs. Bert's breath seized in his chest. He trembled as he walked one step at a time towards the bathroom. I can't believe I'm doing this, he thought. When he reached the doorway to the bathroom, Bert eyed the window that was in fact wide open now, and then he closed his eyes and exhaled. Tugging the gun from his pants, he spun on his heel and fired before he even got a good look at the man he was shooting at. There was a bang and then a thud, and the guy went down. Bert, heart racing and pounding, went back into the bedroom for a closer look and to see if he had actually just killed someone. He hoped he didn't. That wasn't something he was ready to live with. The man on the ground looked up at him, his face a portrait of agony. Bert's eyes moved to the dying man's hand and saw that it was gunless. He followed a straight line across the floor to his dresser and saw where it lay. Then he looked back at the man. The guy's breathing was shallow, his hand on the growing stain spreading through the shirt on his chest, crimson drool running out of the side of his mouth. He wasn't dead, but he would be before long if he didn't get immediate medical attention. Then Bert the loner would be. Bert the murderer. Because that's what I need. I should have run for the car when I had the chance. That thing will kill you. The man coughed, spraying a bloody spittle that Bert turned away from. Still, he could feel it wet his shoulder. It'll kill us all. Bert could feel someone's presence and he looked towards the doorway. Tolliver stood in it, looking at him. He was even bloodier than he had been earlier, his long hair matted to his head and clumped with red. It was caked all over his face, crusting his eyes, cheeks, and chin. He was the last of this wave, Tolliver said. You did well, but there'll be more, so I need to requisition your car. You do have a car, right? Bert took a deep breath and walked up to stare the man in the face. He searched Tolliver's eyes for a moment but found nothing out of the ordinary. I'm not giving you my car. I'll take you where you want to go, but I'm driving. We're both misfits. I get that much, but before we go anywhere, you need to tell me what these people think you are. Why do they want you dead? Tolliver sighed and walked back into the living room. Bert followed him and immediately gagged at what he saw. The front door was wide open, the recliner on its back on the floor nearby. There was a man bent backwards, draped over the back of the couch like a blanket, his head bashed in, most likely with the hammer. Rivulets of crimson ran down from his concave skull, over his smashed and broken, barely discernible face to pool on the couch cushion. One lone eyeball hung from the mess that used to be a face, and it stared directly at Bert. Gah! Even in a life or death situation, is it necessary to be that brutal? Bert put a hand to his mouth and turned away from the grisly scene, but in his mind he saw the violence play out. A wild Tolliver smashing the person in the face over and over as their bones broke and the face fell in on itself, like they were no more than a clay sculpture filled with blood. That blood and more had sprayed everywhere. When Bert opened his eyes, he sighed with disgust. His living room was covered. The windows, furniture, carpet, broken door, and even the ceiling wore a fresh coat of red. They want me dead because I already am, Tolliver said to him, drawing Bert's attention away from the gore. I'm a vampire, or at least I was. I detoxed. Starving myself of blood returned my mortality. Abstaining made me human again, but one drink will bring it all back. I can taste it on my lips, and I'm craving it so bad, but it's merely physical. I want to stay human, to live a normal life, but these people won't ever see me as anything other than what I used to be. In my other state, there's little they can do to me. I'm immortal, but in this more human state, I'm susceptible to things just like you are, you know? Like a steak knife to the hand. They're trying to force me into a situation where my life is in danger and I have to drink in order to stay alive. It'll prove I'm a monster. I didn't want to give them that satisfaction, but you were making it really tempting every time you opened your mouth. Bert dropped his hand and glared at this man that had broken into his home and brought all this chaos and violence into his life. "You asshole," he said, and Tolliver actually looked surprised. "You made fun of me for being a vegetarian, you hypocrite." Tolliver chuckled and shook his head. "That's the part you're upset about? Why did you want the steak if it would turn you back?" Tolliver sighed. "I thought if I needed to be immortal to survive, I could at least do it without killing a human." Bert thought for a moment. "When you had that blood all over your face, was it tempting?" "It still is, all of it. I can smell it, taste it on my tongue, feel it inside, calling to me." "And yet you asked me to get you a towel." Tolliver met his eyes and nodded. "I could use another." "All right," Bert told him. "That's good enough for me. I've never much cared for what people think. There's more towels in the linen closet. I'll meet you in the car." Fishing his keys from his pocket, Bert walked past a dumbfounded Tolliver through the broken front door of his house and out into the night. As he reached the car, Bert could hear someone racing up behind him and his heart jumped. He turned inside with relief to see it was just Tolliver. Strange world when you're relieved to see the man that broke into and destroyed your house and made you an accomplice to murder. Bert used the keyless entry to unlock the car with a couple of loud beeps, and both men turned to look for threats. When they saw none, they opened the doors and got in, quickly closing them. As Bert started the car, he looked at Tolliver and asked, "The garlic and the cross?" Tolliver snorted. "Oh, rubbish. Made-up movie nonsense." "Figures," Bert said as he backed the car out of the garage. "So, why are you coming with me? Is it just because I wrecked your house?" Bert's eyes were on the road when he answered, "No, it's because we're both different. We're both alone. We both just ache to be normal and okay, and feel like the world won't let us. I don't like being around other people, but I feel like you might get it." Tolliver just nodded and turned to gaze out the window. Then he yelled, "Look out!" Someone came tearing out of the woods, running straight for their car, arm raised high, holding an axe, a wooden stake in the hand tucked at their hip. Bert just pushed down on the gas and accelerated. They hit the charging man head-on, and he flew into the air to only land back on the hood of the car in a mess of tangled limbs, his wild face smooshed against the glass of the windshield. Bert slammed the brakes and the man toppled off like a marionette with severed strings. Without hesitation, Bert drove the car over him, and it jostled him around like he was going too fast over a speed bump. Tolliver was looking at him with shock and awe, and what Bert hoped was a little bit of respect and admiration. Bert just smiled and watched the passing trees. "I'm already riding with the vampire," he thought. "Maybe we'll find Bigfoot out here too."
Christina Lawson sat at a corner table in a small cafe, coffee sitting in front of her, gloved hands tucked beneath her legs. Folk pop music played over the cafe's sound system in a vain attempt to give the place a relaxing atmosphere, but it was filled with so many people, ordering at the counter, sitting and talking to one another, working behind the counter and operating various whirring, whooshing, or grinding machines, and the air thrummed with tension. She glanced around at the other customers, a couple sitting at a table, each involved in whatever was displayed on their phone screens instead of looking at each other. A father sitting with his twin daughters, who were 5 at the most, and dressed in superhero outfits complete with capes, one green, one red, sipping juice boxes while their dad drank his coffee. A pair of middle-aged women in blue medical smocks talking over coffee and pastries after a long hospital shift, and a dozen more, including the staff behind the counter. All of them appeared completely normal, completely sane. But she knew better than most that appearances didn't mean shit. Anything could be happening behind their eyes. Their thoughts, a chaotic maelstrom of wild imperceptions and barely restrained homicidal impulses. Any one of them could be on the verge of succumbing to the lunacy raging inside. And then, all hell would break loose. Pam would have told her she was being paranoid, and maybe so. But she'd seen it happen before, and if it had happened once, it could happen again. She wasn't sure why Pam had asked to have their session in a public place like this instead of her office. No doubt she thought there was a good reason for it. Maybe some new type of therapy that she wanted to try. But Christina wasn't comfortable around people, especially this many. She looked down at the tabletop to avoid meeting anyone's gaze. She flexed her hands, felt them move under her legs, was reassured to know that they were still protected. She made no move to touch the coffee in front of her. She didn't want it. Didn't really like coffee much. She only bought it so she wouldn't look any stranger sitting there than she already did. Pam rushed into the shop then, blonde hair a frizzy mess, makeup slightly askew as if she'd applied it too fast. She looked around, saw Christina, smiled, and hurried over to her table. "Sorry I'm late," she said. "Do you mind if I order something before we get started?" Christina did mind. She wanted to get whatever this was over as soon as possible, but she shook her head. Pam smiled again, then headed to the counter. There was a line, and Christina watched her stand there for several moments until it was her time to order. She trusted Pam, as much as she trusted anyone, that is. She'd seen a number of therapists over the years, most of whom had treated her as if she was the crazy one. Pam had been the first to treat her as if she was a person, instead of merely a psychologically fascinating puzzle to be solved. A shattered porcelain doll, whose pieces needed to be put back together. She'd been seeing Pam for almost 2 years, and she couldn't deny they'd made progress together. 2 years ago, she never could have come into a place like this by herself, order a drink, sit, and wait for someone. But here she was. And if she wasn't comfortable, so what? She was here. Pam returned to the table carrying a large cup that most likely contained a latte with an extra shot of espresso. During one of their earliest sessions, she'd mentioned it was her favorite drink. She sat down opposite Christina and took a long sip before setting the cup down on the table. Normally, Pam began their sessions with some chit-chat. "How have you been since we last talked? Anything new going on with you?" But not this time. "I'm sure you're wondering why I asked you to meet me here today." Christina smiled. The thought had crossed my mind. "I'd like to try something different today, and I thought this would be a good place for it." Called it, Christina thought. "Were you late on purpose in order to give me a chance to handle being by myself?" Pam took another sip of her latte. "The thought had crossed my mind," she said. And, despite herself, Christina laughed. "So, what was it like?" Pam asked. "Tolerable. Although if you'd been much later, I'd probably have left." "Good thing I wasn't any later then, huh?" Pam's expression grew more serious, became what Christina thought of as her doctor face, and she knew their session was about to start in earnest. "How are you feeling about the TV show this week?" Christina grimaced. Okay, I guess. The bastards have stopped trying to contact me, so that's a relief." The producers of a lurid true crime TV show called Unnatural Acts were doing a segment on Christina's mom. For a month, they'd bugged her non-stop, desperate to get an on-camera interview with her, but she'd ignored them. And they'd finally decided to go ahead without her participation. She'd had enough media attention over the last decade to last her a lifetime. News reporters who fought to be the one to interview her first. True crime authors who wanted to write books about what had happened. One was eventually published, Blood on Campus, and it had become a modest success. She hated the attention, hated how it always brought the memories of that awful day back full force. For the last 10 years, she'd hoped people would forget and find a new atrocity to be fascinated by. But it hadn't happened yet, and she was starting to wonder if it ever would. "That's what I wanted to talk to you about," Pam said, then added, "Kind of." "Oh God, don't tell me the producers hired you to be a consultant." Pam's eyes widened in surprise, and then she laughed. "No, and even if they asked me, I'd turn them down. It would violate doctor-patient confidentiality. Plus, it would be a total dick move." Christina relaxed. The thought of Pam betraying her like that was too awful to think about. "So, what do you want to talk about?" She felt her defenses going up. She didn't like to remember that day, let alone talk about it. But Pam had done a lot to help her, so she'd go along with whatever she wanted to do. To a point. Pam took another sip of her latte, a long one, as if fortifying herself for what came next. "We've talked about that day before," she began. "Several times. And during those conversations, I never questioned the truth of what you told me, never disputed the reality of any of it." Christina nodded cautiously. She didn't like where this seemed to be going. Her other therapists had questioned, had tried to convince her that it hadn't happened, or at least that it hadn't happened the way she remembered. One of the things she liked about Pam is that she'd never done that. But maybe she'd just been waiting for what she thought was the right time to bring up the subject. "I went to the university yesterday." An ice-cold hand gripped Christina's heart, and she began trembling. Pam went on, speaking faster as if hoping to get everything out before she freaked. "I'd never been there. I went to college in Chicago before my husband, and I moved to Ohio. It's a beautiful campus. Lovely old buildings, lots of grass and trees. Very different from the downtown campus I attended. The science center is not there anymore. They tore it down years ago and planted trees there. They put up a remembrance plaque too. I think you might find it healing to see it." Christina trembled harder now, and her mouth and throat felt dry as desert sand. She didn't want to reply, but if she tried, her words would have likely come out in a hoarse croak. Pam continued. "I looked for the fountain, but I couldn't find it at first. I thought maybe it had been torn down too, but I found it eventually, and it was peaceful and relaxing, just as you described it." She paused, then added, "I took some pictures with my phone." Sudden nausea erupted in Christina's gut, and her vision blurred. She wanted to jump up from her chair and run toward the exit, but she feared that if she tried, she'd pass out before she made it halfway. "I'd like to show them to you, if that's okay." She wanted to shake her head violently, but she was unable to move. Taking her silence for assent, Pam removed her phone from her purse, brought a picture up on the screen, and then held it out for Christina to see. She scrolled through a series of images, and although Christina wanted to look away, wanted it more than she wanted her next breath, she watched the pictures go by, one after the other. Christina saw the statue on a hot afternoon in late July when she was 13 years old. She was supposed to be attending the second morning of a week-long summer science workshop for middle school kids run by the university. But after her mom had dropped her off in front of the science center and drove away in her Lexus, she decided to wander the campus instead. She hated science and never got good grades in it, which was the reason her overachieving parents had insisted on signing her up for the workshop. But as much as she hated science, she hated being told what to do even more. Rules, regulations, do this, don't do that, be a good girl, don't be a bad girl. Why couldn't everyone just leave her alone to do what she wanted when she wanted? Her parents, teachers, all her life people had told her what to do, and she was sick of it. The only rules she was interested in following were her own. Her parents might have enrolled her in the workshop and paid for it, but they couldn't make her attend if she didn't want to. Yesterday had been so boring. All they'd done was make quote-unquote inventions out of cardboard, tape, glue, plastic straws, popsicle sticks, and other odds and ends. More arts and crafts than science, really. Kid stuff, certainly. Today, she planned to skip out and kick around campus for a couple hours until it was time for Mom to pick her up. And then, she'd meet her back in front of the science center and feed her some bullshit about what the instructors had the kids do today. Her parents were smart. Mom was a lawyer, Dad a pediatrician. But they were so busy they only ever paid partial attention to what she did. Lying to them was almost embarrassingly easy. This wasn't her first time at Ash Creek University. Her parents were both alums and had been dragging her to campus concerts, art shows, and theater productions since she could walk. But in all those visits, and there had been dozens of them, she'd never gotten the chance to explore the place. High time she rectified that, she decided. But after a half hour of walking around in the sun and heat, she was not only bored but miserable. She supposed the campus was pretty enough. Red brick buildings, well-landscaped grounds, large trees. But there wasn't anything to do. And because it was summer, there weren't many people around, which made the place feel empty and lonely. She did like the fact that no one paid any attention to her. The few people she passed, the students and professors, didn't so much as glance at her, as if a 13-year-old walking around campus by herself was completely normal. And it made her feel very grown up. But she'd been walking non-stop since her mother left, and she was tired and sweaty. And while the campus was pleasant for the most part, there was a lot of construction going on. Parking lots being resurfaced, buildings being remodeled, and that meant noise. Machines running, tools striking metal and concrete, people shouting to each other as they worked. She wanted someplace quiet where she could sit in peace for a bit, preferably in the shade. She was on the verge of saying to hell with it and going back to the science center and attending that stupid workshop when she saw the red dumpster. It contained odds and ends from campus construction, chunks of broken concrete, lengths of discarded wood. It was in no way remarkable. She'd seen a dozen like it during her self-guided tour of the campus so far. But what was remarkable was what lay behind it. She almost missed it, so completely did the dumpster block the view. But there was a tiny sliver of space between the side of the dumpster and the old oak tree. And through it, she caught a glimpse of what looked like a fountain. Intrigued, she slipped past the dumpster and found herself standing at the entrance to she wasn't sure what it was exactly. A place for people to sit, relax, think, she supposed. A stone fountain sat atop the third level of a dais, a curving half-circle of stone wall behind it with an arched open doorway in the middle. Wooden benches rested on either side of the doorway, where people could sit and watch the fountain and listen to the gentle trickle of water. The water bubbled up from the center of a large, round stone surface to flow over the edges and into a pool beneath. The water emerged from the edge of the dais in a small waterfall, surrounded by large stones placed to look like a natural formation, with trees surrounding the fountain, separating it from the rest of the world, making it seem as if it were a place out of a fairy tale, a secluded, magical setting that only a lucky few ever found. There was shade here, along with a pleasant breeze and the sound of gently rustling leaves that, combined with the running water, soothed Christina. She knew where she'd be spending the rest of the time until her mother came to get her. Then she looked to the left of the fountain and saw the statue. Her parents had both been raised Catholic, but they weren't religious. Ash Creek University was a private Catholic institution with a reputation for academic excellence, and that was the only reason her parents had come here for their undergraduate degrees. Christina sometimes wondered if they still considered themselves Catholic, culturally, if not spiritually. They took her to Christmas Eve and Easter Mass every year to broaden her horizons, they said. And on the way home, they'd give her a speech about how religion was nothing more than a way to instill moral values in its followers by using metaphor and symbolism. And it was not to be taken literally. Thanks to her broadened horizons, she recognized the statue of the Virgin Mary, the mother of Jesus. Mary stood atop a granite pedestal, their feet sticking out from beneath the hem of her robe. She held her hands out before her, fingers steepled as if praying, her hood-covered head bowed. There was no expression on her face. Her eyes were closed, and her mouth was little more than a line with only a suggestion of lips. But the detail that stood out the most to Christina was what looked like a thick reptilian tail protruding from the back of her robe and curling around her left foot. She frowned upon seeing the tail, for that's what it had to be, couldn't be anything else. She was no expert on Catholic theology, but she felt confident that Mary was not supposed to have a lizard's tail. There was something written on the granite base the statue stood on, and she walked over to read it. It was a single word: Pandemonia. And beneath that, in smaller letters, a quote: "If there is a universal mind, who says it has to be sane? Charles Fort." Was this some kind of weird piece of art, or maybe a joke of some kind? And then the tail twitched, just the tip. And it happened so fast she wasn't sure she'd really seen it. She looked up at the statue's face, and ice-cold fear hit her when she saw its eyes were now open. They weren't the same gray-white as the rest of the statue, though. Instead, they were a glossy obsidian. And while she could read nothing within their empty blackness, she could feel the weight of the statue's gaze upon her. "You do well to shun the false god of science, child." The statue's thin mouth didn't move. Its voice, cold as midnight and dry as ancient bone, echoed in her mind. "Science pretends there is order to existence, that for every question there is an answer. This is a lie. Existence is random and meaningless, and that is glorious." The statue bent toward Christina and stretched its hands toward her. At first, she was so terrified she couldn't move, could only stand and watch the stone fingers draw closer. But then, her survival instincts kicked in and she threw off her paralysis and turned to run. But before she could take more than a single step, the stone tail lashed out and encircled her waist, stopping her. She pulled and tugged, but she could not break free of the tail's stone coils. The statue closed its hard fingers around Christina's right wrist and held her hand steady as its lips parted, and a pearl of thick, dark liquid emerged. It fell onto the back of her hand and sat there for a moment, burning cold on her skin before flattening against her flesh and slowly disappearing into her body. She felt no different, but a shudder raced through her just the same. The soothing rhythm of the fountain ceased, and the sudden silence drew Christina's attention. She glanced over to see the water had stopped flowing, and an instant later, blood welled up from the center of the round stone, crimson and thick. It oozed across the surface, overflowing the stone's edges, falling in ropey threads into the pool below, before finally emerging as a red waterfall. She looked into the statue's obsidian eyes, its face only inches from her now. Go forth and share the gift I have bestowed upon you, my daughter. Free them. Free them all. Christina had no memory of the statue releasing her, no memory of beginning to run. One moment she was standing there, trapped in the statue's embrace, staring into its obsidian eyes. And the next she was running full out, heart pounding, lungs heaving, sweat pouring off her. She had no destination in mind, wasn't capable of anything approaching rational thought at that moment. Her body operated on autopilot, returning her to the place she'd started from, the Science Center. She was relieved to see her mom's Lexus parked in front of the building, and she ran straight to it, only partially aware of the tears streaming down her face. She ran to the driver's side window and began pounding on it to get her mother's attention. It was several moments before she realized the car was empty. "There you are!" Christina stopped pounding on the window and looked up to see her mother exiting the science building, her face a mask of anger. She continued chiding Christina as she walked toward her. "I was in a meeting with a client when the workshop director called to ask me why you weren't present today. I hauled ass down here, grinding my teeth to nubs the whole way. Why can't you, for once in your life, do what you're supposed..." She trailed off as she reached Christina, her expression softening. "Are you okay, honey? Why are you crying? Did something happen?" Before Christina could respond, her mom took hold of her hands and gave them a reassuring squeeze. The instant their flesh came in contact, her mother stiffened, and her eyes widened in shock. She began shaking her head as if trying to deny something only she could see. She paled, an expression of absolute horror coming onto her face. But instead of turning away from the unseen whatever it was, she continued looking, and slowly, her features slackened, and her expression became placid. She remained like that for several heartbeats, still holding on to Christina's hands, and then she spoke in a calm, almost toneless voice. "Thank you. I understand now." She looked at Christina, and in the same flat voice said, "I'm going to go tell the director I found you and you're safe. I'll be back in a minute." She released Christina's hands, turned, walked back into the building. Christina's tears subsided to a trickle, but she was no longer aware of them. She stared at the glass door that was the entrance to the science building, unable to escape the feeling that something was terribly wrong. For a moment, she forgot about the statue, or rather she forced herself not to think of it. When Mom got mad, really mad, she stayed that way for a while, sometimes hours. Christina had never seen her calm down so quickly and completely. It was like a switch had been thrown inside her, shutting off all her emotions. It was beyond weird. And that's when the screaming began. It was muffled, but the sound was unmistakable. It came from somewhere inside the building, where the science workshop was taking place. She saw a smallish, child-sized hand slap the window from the inside. The hand was covered with blood and left a red smear on the glass as it slid away. Her own paralysis was broken by the sight, and she ran into the building and went up the stairs, taking them 2 and 3 at a time. The screams grew louder and fewer the closer she got to the second floor, and they were punctuated by moans of pain. She slowed as she approached the classroom where the workshop was held. She didn't want to go in, didn't want to see whatever waited for her. But she had to. Her mother was in there. The door was open, and by the time she reached it, the sounds had stopped. No more screams. No more moans. Just silence. She stepped inside, not far, only a foot or so. The room was set up the same way as it had been yesterday. 10 circular tables with chairs around them, materials for students to use in constructing their projects in the middle. It was more like art class than science, which had been one of the reasons she'd found it so boring. But what she saw now wasn't boring. Far from it. Bodies were scattered around the classroom, but there were a couple of adults as well. Some lay on the floor in various positions, while others had collapsed into chairs or onto desks. They had sustained numerous cuts, and blood was everywhere. On their clothes, on the desks and chairs, on the floor and walls. And all the corpses, around 20 in total, appeared to have died the same way, by having their throats cut. Christina's mother stood in the middle of the room, holding a pair of box cutters. Her clothes, hands, and face covered in blood. She turned to face Christina and smiled, her teeth a startling patch of white in her otherwise crimson face. "Thank you for helping me to see how things really are, sweetie. Thank you for setting me free." She raised both box cutters and pressed the tips of the razors to the small hollow at the base of her neck. And then, with a pair of vicious outward swipes, she laid open her throat. Blood fountained from the wound to join that which already covered her. If she felt any pain, her voice didn't show it. Her smile widened, and her eyes seemed to almost glow. Christina didn't know the word beatific, but if she had, that is how she would have described her mother's expression. Her mother stood like that for a time, but eventually, the box cutter slipped from her hands and thumped to the floor. A moment later, she joined them, collapsing and staring up at the ceiling with wide, unblinking eyes. Her smile, however, remained in place. And then it was Christina's turn to scream. Christina saw the fountain, the stone wall behind it, the rocks in front of it, the trees surrounding it. But there was one thing she didn't see on the phone screen: the statue. "I checked with the campus groundskeeper's office," Pam said, "and they told me that not only isn't there a statue next to the fountain, there never has been in the university's 122-year history." She closed the phone's photo app and replaced the device in her purse. There was no statue, Christina. In your mind, yes, but not in the physical world. It didn't infect you with... She frowned, as if unsure how to put it. With its madness. And you didn't pass it on to your mother when she grabbed your hands. You aren't responsible for what she did. And you never were. All of Christina's therapists had argued that the statue wasn't real, at least not the way she'd perceived it. But none had gone so far as to visit the campus and take pictures, let alone check to see if the statue had ever existed. A part of her that was still 13 and maybe always would be, wanted to shout at Pam, accuse her of lying. But the rest of her, the woman she had become in the last 10 years, wanted to believe her. What a comfort it would be to believe that her mother had done what she'd done for some other reason than because she'd touched her daughter's hand and come into contact with the contagion that Pandemonia had infected her with. "I know how to prove that you had nothing to do with what happened," Pam said. "But you will have to trust me. Do you trust me, Christina?" She hesitated, but then managed a single nod. Good. Now put your hands on the table." Christina stared at her, not quite sure she'd heard correctly. "You told me that you've worn gloves every day for the last 10 years, that you won't even take the right one off to bathe. All because you don't want to risk infecting anyone else." "Yes." She'd been obsessively careful over the years. "But if there was no statue, there is no infection to pass on, and that means you can touch someone without anything bad happening. So you can touch me." Pam put her left hand on the table, palm up. Christina looked at Pam's hand, head swimming with vertigo. What's more likely to be true? That some thing chose you to spread some kind of psychological plague? Or that your mind made up that incident so you wouldn't have to believe that your mother was responsible for killing all those people? Christina knew which of the choices was the most logical, but that didn't necessarily make it the correct one. Still, she took a deep breath and slid her hands out from under her legs. She wanted to get better, she truly did. And she recognized that this would be a huge step toward making that possible. She removed her left glove, the one that she really didn't need to wear, and placed it on the table. And then, after another moment's hesitation, she removed the right and placed it next to the left. The air felt cold on the exposed skin of her hands, but it felt stimulating too. Then, slowly, fighting every instinct inside her that screamed she shouldn't be doing this, she lowered her right hand onto Pam's. And for the first time since that day, she touched another human being. Pam curled her fingers upward to grasp hers, and tears of joy welled in Christina's eyes. Pam had been right. The statue hadn't been real. It hadn't. Pam's eyes glazed over, and her features went slack. She pulled her hand away from Christina's. "No," Christina whispered. "No, no, no, no." Pam didn't respond. Instead, she rose from the table and walked toward the counter. But instead of stopping in front of the register, she continued on, stepping behind the counter where the staff were working. They looked at her for a moment, as if uncertain what to say or do. Then, one of them, a skinny 20-something with a goatee and a man bun, stepped forward to block her way. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but you're not..." Pam reached down, and from somewhere Christina could not see from the table, grabbed hold of a knife. It was long and sharp with a black plastic handle, one of the implements the staff used when preparing sandwiches or slicing bagels. Man Bun started to raise his hands as if he thought he could ward off Pam by gesture alone. But before he could complete the gesture, Pam swiped the blade across his throat in a single, swift motion. Flesh parted, blood spurted, and Man Bun clapped his hands to his throat in a ridiculously ineffective attempt to stop the bleeding. People started screaming then, and while some stared at Pam dumbfounded, the majority bolted for the door. Too many tried to go through it at the same time, but the crowd behind them pushed until the jam was broken, and everyone could get through. Pam turned away from the bleeding man whose mouth kept opening and closing like a fish as he attempted to speak. But all he managed were wet clicking sounds. And then his eyes rolled white, and he slumped to the floor. His co-workers gaped at his prone form for a second, but when Pam came out from around the corner and started back toward Christina, they saw the opportunity to get the hell out of there, and they lost no time in doing so, fleeing into the street after their departed customers. By the time Pam returned to the table, still gripping the knife, blade slick with blood, the cafe was empty, except for the two of them. Christina wanted to look away from Pam's gaze, wanted to close her eyes and wait to feel the knife's edge kiss on her throat. But she forced herself to meet her therapist's eyes. She half expected to see that they had become a glossy obsidian. But they looked the same as they always had, save for the complete and total lack of anything resembling human emotion within them. "You were given a gift," Pam spoke in a toneless voice that reminded Christina of the way her mother had spoken before going inside the science building. "And you've wasted it." Moving so swiftly that Christina hardly saw her move, Pam grabbed hold of her right wrist and pressed her hand to the table. "Time to return what you've squandered." She pressed the sharp edge of the knife against the tender skin of Christina's wrist. Christina impressed herself by not feeling afraid. It would be a relief to be rid of Pandemonia's dark gift, and if she bled to death after Pam performed her impromptu amputation, well, what of it? At least she would have kept her sanity at the end. She gritted her teeth to steel herself for the pain to come and curled her right hand into a fist, the tips of her fingers pressing hard into her palm. 10 years she had avoided touching herself with her right hand, terrified of what might happen. Now she knew. Now she understood. Pam kept the blade pressed against her skin for another moment, but then she pulled it away and released her grip on Christina's wrist. Face still expressionless, eyes still dead. She handed the knife to Christina and then stood there, waiting. Christina examined the blade, turning it this way and that to see how the light played across the metal. The barista's blood still clung to the knife, and she brought the blade to her mouth and licked it clean. She cut her own tongue in the process, but she didn't care. The pain was exquisite, and the blood she swallowed, hers mixed with his, tasted sweeter than any wine. She looked at Pam. "Thank you for everything," she said, and then rammed the blade into the woman's chest, expertly slipping it between a pair of ribs and into her heart. The non-expression on Pam's face didn't change as she slipped free of the blade and collapsed to the floor, dead. Instead of licking the knife this time, Christina wiped it on her cheeks, smearing them with Pam's blood. Many times over the years, she tried to imagine what it had been like inside her mother's mind after she'd experienced the dark touch. The closest she could have come to was to imagine Mom's skull as a hive filled with angry, buzzing bees, furiously trying to sting one another to death. She was surprised to discover she hadn't been far off the mark. The sound, one of absolute and total disorder, was magnificent. It was the song of discord and upheaval, of malady and torment, of decay and dissolution, and she could not wait to share it with the world. She heard Pandemonia's voice one last time. "That's my girl." Christina tossed the knife onto Pam's lifeless body and started walking toward the door. She flexed the fingers of her right hand, as if limbering them up. She had work to do. Important work. And she couldn't wait to get started.
How does it feel?
It asks this as it cuts deep into the inner thigh, flesh and fat zippering apart, its tongue probing into the fresh wound.
How are you doing?
The thing wouldn't want an answer even if there was one. It only wants screams.
This is going to be worth it. You're going to love next year. This will make it worth the having.
I used to wonder what could be worth this. The heat of its palms pushing legs apart. The cold, slow rivulets of saliva dripping down like icy syrup, washed away with slow impulses of hot blood. That single tooth in its lower jaw, barbed and curved. That awful, knowing smile from the puckered sphincter of its mouth. This year, I finally understand that phrase. Worth the having. This year, The final year of our horrible agreement. The thing still uses that word, agreement, as if I wanted any of this. I understand it all. 22 years ago, I cut across the backyard of Mikey Slater's dad's house. This was the night before Halloween. The night I'd later learn that thing would stretch its legs and go for a walk. The thing was the reason for the season. The whole tradition of Halloween had started because of it. Masks, costumes, disguises, none of it for fun. All of it primal camouflage to help the prey hide from the predator. Nobody remembers that part of the tradition anymore. Not even the thing itself. It just knows to walk the night before Halloween. And it walks to me. I don't ask where it goes when it leaves me, or what it does on Halloween night. I'm just glad it's gone. Anyway, Mikey Slater. His parents had been divorced a few years, and I treated our hangout like a second home. The other bonus was that it was a quick end around the neighborhood when I needed to get home fast. I was on my way home from checking out Mikey's Halloween costume at his mom's house and had about 2 minutes to get home before dinner was cold and my ass would get spanked. We'd made a pact to dress as characters from this cartoon about interstellar nights. We had some great things rigged to our costumes, lights and fake swords, the whole works. We expected that tomorrow night we'd barely be able to do any trick-or-treating since we'd be mobbed by admirers wondering how we obtained these amazing costumes. I vaulted the 6-foot wooden slatted fence, landed softly in the garden, not caring if my presence was announced or not, since Mikey's dad never cared if I cut through. And then I saw Mr. Slater lying in the grass near the back door, naked. Another person straddled him, pinning his arms down. Pale skin, soft curves. It looked like a woman. The back did anyway. The head was too small and bald with a mohawk of downy feathers. And this silhouette dipped down, the head bobbing just above Mr. Slater's crotch. I was young, but not so young that I didn't have a small clue about what I might be seeing. I heard a whisper.
Almost done. Almost done. Next year is going to be fantastic. This will all be worth it.
And Mr. Slater replied,
No. No, no. No more. There's nothing I want. Everything I want is gone.
Occasionally he hissed, his breath stifling a scream. Pleasure wasn't part of this.
No more. No more, please. You must want something. It's you and I forever. If you don't want anything.
And here the naked thing yanked a hand back from Mr. Slater's thigh. And that's when I noticed the blood and the flap of flayed skin that I'd initially mistaken for underwear pulled down. I tried to turn around, grabbed the fence to bail out. I wanted to get out of there, wanted to be home.
You what?
It whipped its head around at me, and I felt its voice in my head more than I heard it.
Take him! Take him!
Mr. Slater cried out, pointing at me. I can't explain any of what happened next. Can't explain the face I saw when I locked eyes with the thing. Can't explain the speed with which it moved. It crossed the yard in 3 hitching strides, seizing my ankles as I tried to get out of the yard. I flopped my upper body over the fence and struggled for anything to grab, to pull, to get free. I heard a whisper. No, felt it.
Mine.
One quick bite on my ankle. A burning pain, searing, electric.
Make a wish before you go to bed. Think about what you want next year more than anything. We have an agreement now.
It wasn't a question or an offer. It released me and I dropped to the ground in the alley behind the fence. I reached to my ankle. There was a fading flash of pain and burning, but no blood, no cut. Mikey's dad came stumbling around the corner, wearing nothing but a pair of shorts, holding a handgun.
Is it still here? Is it?
I said nothing. What could I say? What the hell was happening?
My God, if you hadn't shown up, I'm free.
He smiled at me and turned away. There was a flash in his eyes, a moment where he was teetering between life and death. That gun, the fulcrum between finishing something very bad or starting something new. His hand rose slowly.
But don't. Mikey.
Those were the only 3 words in the mess behind my lips that could break through. It was enough. His hand swung free and heavy.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Just try to think of good things for yourself.
He looked at the gun again.
What the hell was I gonna do with this thing? Don't ever think about trying to kill it, whatever you do. Just take what you have coming, and then think of good things for yourself.
I barely remembered getting home. By the time I was through my front door, the details were hazy. My ankle was fine. No cut, no scab, not even a scratch. I slid into bed, trying to remember the thing, the face, the hands, anything. But it was all gone. A haze. My gaze drifted over the shelves around my room, the random toys scattered around, the baseball bat leaning against the corner. I hopped out of bed and brought it close by, feeling like it would keep me safe, not knowing from what. As I drifted off that night, my last thought was about Little League and my wish that I wasn't too damn fat to play shortstop.
That's good enough.
A whisper shot through the center of my brain. Cold sweat broke over my upper lip, then calmness, then sleep. When I woke up the next morning, I'd forgotten the previous night completely. I was full of energy, light on my feet. I felt ready to take on the world. Things felt a little darker in the afternoon as I walked by Mr. Slater's house on my way to Mikey's, but I couldn't quite peg why. I saw him sitting on his porch, a strange smile on his face. I kept moving, and that night was a Halloween much like any other. The following year, I dropped a lot of weight, got faster, made the team. Didn't think of how or why, just attributed it to hard work and eating right. Then early October came, and I found a postcard on my pillow when I got home from school. I'd like to say I got cold chills when I picked it up, or that it felt like flesh or leathery hide, but no, just plain cheap cardboard, typed in a neat white font on one side. It read,
Halloween is almost here. Did you have a good year? What do you want next year? Think hard. Make it worth the having.
I wanted to show the card to my mom, but by the time she got home from work, it was gone. Every time anyone brought up Halloween, this icicle of dread would rocket down my spine, and then disappear in a haze of thoughts about candy and costumes, an itch at the back of my mind that I couldn't quite scratch. The night before Halloween, Laying my costume out before going to bed, my only thoughts were on candy and sneaking around in the dark. It was 2 a.m. when I woke to a great weight on top of me, pushing the blankets down tight and cocooning me inside. I opened my eyes to see a silhouette, slight shoulders that were a bit too sharp, full breasts that seemed too round, slender arms that pinned me down. It was too dark to see details. I tried to cry out for my parents, but the thing lifted a hand to my mouth, cold, boneless fingers clamping down. The palm spread like cold jelly as the thing drew its hand back, forcing 1, then 2 fingers into my mouth. There was a texture to the bottom of them, something between a snake's belly and octopus suction pads. The whisper in my brain.
Have you thought on it? Thought on what? The postcard I sent. What you want for next year. Who are you? It doesn't matter who I am. It matters who you are. You are mine. How did you? Just as you hear me in your mind, I hear you in mine. You are mine. What does that mean? It means you are mine.
I felt the thing rock down with its pelvis, grind into my stomach.
The agreement is not without benefit to you. I didn't agree to anything. Does a fish agree to feed a shark? Does a tree agree to be struck by lightning? You are mine.
The thing drew closer to me, and I squeezed my eyes shut. Everything grew bright until I could make out shapes, then colors. Then I could see it in front of me.
You don't need your ears to hear me, nor your eyes to see. You are mine.
It was mottled in gray. The torso was curved and sensuous, but the head, that too small head, the puckered sphincter of a mouth that prolapsed in and out, exposing that single jagged tooth. The 2 giant eyes, bulbous and red, shot with veins but no pupils. The 2 smaller green eyes in between. No ears, no nose. The tuft of white feathers in a stripe over the shining bald skull. Squeezing my eyes shut tighter only seemed to draw out more clarity.
You need to understand how this works. I will show you. Think of a woman you desire.
I couldn't. I was 12. There wasn't desire yet, only a strange fascination. An occasional stern if I saw a woman on TV in a swimsuit, or that time I sneaked a peek at my dad's private magazine collection. The thing on top of me changed. Hair grew. The head filled in. The face melted and morphed into the perfectly sculpted features of that lady from Beach Patrol who had just done the cover shoot for Playboy. Bronze skin, swaying breasts, a sculpted collarbone, skin coated in a sheen of sweat, just as I'd seen her in the centerfold.
Better.
It hadn't changed the feeling of the fingers in my mouth, cold like snails, twitching and probing around my tongue.
Every year on this night, I'm going to find you. I must feed. In exchange, you will tell me something you want. And over the course of the next year, You shall have it. But I don't want. You are.
And the fingers extended slowly, pushing against the back of my throat, gagging me.
Mine. Understand it. Tell me your desire. Make it worth the having. I want you to leave me alone. Not part of the bargain. Not your place to ask. You are mine.
The fingers pushed deeper still until I could feel them sliding down into my throat. I couldn't breathe. Instinct kicked in and I began to thrash. I needed to escape. I bit down hard on the fingers, breaking the skin. Cold, peppery ichor oozing into my mouth. The thing didn't draw back. It moaned, reached up with its other hand and caressed itself.
More.
It pushed hard on my mouth, wanting me to bite. I let my jaw go slack. It sighed, the kind of sigh I was too young to understand as sexually frustrated, and its fingers pulled back. I felt my lungs suck in air. I thought I was going to die. Thoughts of school crossed my mind. Thoughts of family trips I'd never get to take. I'd never get to see Disney World.
Is that something you desire?
I nodded in spite of myself. The thing on top of me slowly morphed back to its original form, spinning around on my body so I could only see its back. I felt it pulling at the sheets covering my feet.
I want you to think harder next year. Make it good. Make it worth the having. This is scarcely worth a toe, let alone two. What?
And I felt the cold fingers of one hand clamp down on my ankle, while the other fingers slithered down between my toes, constricting them, spreading them apart.
No,
I said.
No. Please don't. Next year you will remember this and understand what it means when I say, make it worth the having.
Its head lowered and its lips wrapped around my big toe. It sucked once, twice, then clamped down with a force I can't describe. That single tooth razored into the meat of my toe and flicked, cutting, tearing. I screamed. I had to have screamed, but there was no sound. I could feel the blood pumping out of my toe, feel the vibrations of serrated tooth on bone, clamping, twisting, pulling, until it was all electricity and cold air. The thing turned to me and pursed its lips. It showed me my toe, sucking it so it bobbed in and out of its mouth before tipping its head back and swallowing. The opening between its legs pulsed and shuddered, cold slime pulling onto my sheets. It sighed.
One more.
This time I did get a scream out. A small yelp as it latched onto my second toe and began chewing again. Its leg cracked and bent around at an impossible angle until its foot was over my mouth, spreading like taffy, covering my nose and lips so that no sound could escape, no breath could enter. There was no smell, just electric pain, vibrant agony, a crack, a tear, and more cold air. The second toe went much easier than the first. The creature arched its back and swallowed, ripples shivering down its flanks as it came again. It spun, bringing its face close to mine. I squeezed my eyes shut to no effect.
Enjoy your trip. Next year, think harder.
Without moving its torso, it raised one leg, stretched it toward my windowsill. Gripping hard, it pulled itself up and out into the night. I stared down over my soaked sheets at my foot. The silhouette in the dark room danced through the purple lightning of pain. It didn't seem to be bleeding. It didn't hurt. I didn't pass out from the pain. I passed out when I tried to count my toes and had to stop at 3. I awoke screaming as I felt someone shaking my shoulder. Unbidden, I saw that face, round and leathery and purple, hovering inches from mine.
Honey, it's okay.
When I opened my eyes, I saw my mother's face.
Are you feeling okay? Your bed is soaked. Did you wet the bed?
I burst into tears, kicking at the sheets until they came free. I could feel the burning sensation in my toes still, the raw wound scraping at the fabric.
No!
I shouted.
Look what it did! Look what it did!
I held my foot up. 5 toes. Had I not already been crying, I might have started then, or possibly even wet the bed out of sheer joy. I wiggled my toes, jumped out of bed.
What's gotten into you?
My big toe was a bit red. My second toe had a definite hard ridge beneath the skin like a scar, but they were there. They were back. I was whole. My toes were... Mine.
Did you stub your toe last night?
My mom grabbed my foot, poking at my toes. No pain.
No, Ow!
There was a scab on the underside of my big toe. Damp sheets, no blood, 5 toes.
You need to get up and be more careful. You get a cut like that, you show me, okay? Otherwise it could get infected and you might lose your toes. You wouldn't want that, would you?
I blanched.
You need to get up. It's Halloween. Big breakfast to fuel up for a big night, right?
Her hand sank into the dampness on my sheet, the essence that the creature had left behind in its ecstasy. Her eyes became vacant, distant, as she pulled the sheet off and bunched them on the floor.
Well, I'll wash these later. You go run along.
She absently licked at her fingers as she left. By the time I made it downstairs for breakfast, I'd forgotten about my aching toes. By the time I was out the door, my sheets were in the wash and my mind was on Halloween. The events of the evening never returned to traumatize me. I don't remember much of the school year that followed, but I remember our vacation. The best we had ever had as a family. I remember years later my parents telling me that the trip had been a new beginning for them, bringing them out of a rough patch that I had been blissfully unaware of. The next year, when Halloween drew close, I got another card, this time in my lunchbox at school. Matte black, bearing only the reminder.
Make it worth the having.
Reading those words instantly sent a spasm of pain through my foot and up my spine. I couldn't see the creature in mine, but it was omnipresent. That assault, that pain, and the reward it brought. The night before Halloween that year, I asked if I could sleep in my parents' room, and as soon as the question left my mouth, a whisper buzzed through my brain.
Oh no, don't make them watch. Why would you do that to them?
So I didn't. I slept in my closet that year thinking it might not find me, but I was wrong. I could explain this, break it down year by year and tell what happened, but that's not what I'm going to do. It's about that phrase, make it worth the having. That second time, it stood at the door of my closet, towering over me, taking on features it must have thought looked friendly. The face shifting from Santa Claus to Jesus to cartoon mice and rabbits.
I don't want you to go through this for nothing. Think big. Please stop. I'll stop when I'm full and finished, and I'll still come back next year. Don't wish for toys. Don't wish for things for other people. Think of yourself. Remember our meeting last year, and know what's about to happen will be far worse than a few toes. Don't let this happen for nothing. Make it worth the...
I screamed hard, muffled by the gelatinous glob of fingers it had forced into my mouth again. I just wanted it to shut up. I never wanted to hear that phrase again, but I knew I would. I knew this, all of this, would be happening again and again. That's a big burden to put on the shoulders of a child, right? Have almost anything you want in exchange for giving the thing what it wants. That's not accurate. In exchange for the thing taking what it wants. I mean, what can a child think of that would be worth that? The second year, all I could think of was sports cars. It made me try again. Why ask for something I couldn't legally use? Millions of dollars? Same thing. It had to be personal. So the second year, I wished to be the fastest, strongest kid in my school. Done. And in exchange for that, for the next 60 minutes, the creature flayed my arms and legs with that horrible tooth, peeled back my skin and chose 3 strands of exposed muscle from each limb, snapping them near one tendon and pulling them out like spaghetti, lifting it as high as it would go before placing the strand in its mouth and sucking it down greedily, biting off the other end at the tendon. It held its gelatinous foot over my mouth the whole time, tiny suction foot pads inhaling the screams that never made it into the night. Blood everywhere. Pain like I had never felt to that point anyway. When it was done, it left me wide open like a biology class project pinned to a tray, trying to sleep and failing miserably. I passed out at some point and woke up in the morning, mildly sore but fully intact, testing out my newfound strength on my dad's weight bench by the end of the day. By the end of the week, I was running home from school without breaking a sweat. By the end of the school year, I was medaling in every sport I chose. When October rolled around and the black postcard fell out of a library book I pulled from the shelf, the sinking dread in my stomach was almost matched by the excitement of the next thing I planned to ask for. That night, it ate half of one of my kidneys. Once it managed to pull the organ free, it wasn't so bad, but getting there was sheer hell. 14 years old, I made the wish any hormonally rampaging boy would, and that year, I got every girl I was interested in. Was it worth it? Hard to say, but that year I came to understand that I was addicted, that I understood what worth the having meant, and that my life was going to improve. I thought I had it all figured out. I had to try something new, despite seeing the thing lick its lips, despite seeing the horrible tongue dance over that single stupid tooth and the puckered maw it called a mouth. Something new was too enticing to resist. Year by year, piece by piece, I was going to become a better man. Everything that's happened in my life is a bit of a blur, but not those nights. Those I have perfect clarity on. I got better than perfect eyesight the year it spent hours working my eyeballs free from the sockets after using one jagged nail to cut my eyelids off. More length and girth downstairs. It was my first year of college after all. That year was sheer torture. It changed its shape to a calendar girl, arousing me, bringing me to climax orally in spite of myself. The soft, supple features of the woman's body betrayed the cold, slimy oatmeal feeling of the thing's mouth and throat. And then came the pain. My member first peeled like a raw potato with that single hooked tooth, then the soft tissue torn free, then the tongue probing into the open wound at my crotch until my testes were pulled free from my body and eaten. No, nibbled, held daintily between thumb and forefinger with pinky extended until they were gone. That night I was on a camping trip, so the thing didn't even need to muffle my screams, and I obliged it until I was choking on my own vomit and my throat was raw. Physically, I was fine the next day, but it took me a few weeks to get the feeling of it all out of my mind. Once I did, I quickly developed a reputation as big man on campus in every way imaginable. By the end of the year, every woman worth having knew my number. After college, my life became career-oriented. Real estate, stock market, passive income. I wanted to be rich while having as much free time as possible to research, because I needed to know how to finish this thing. Mikey's dad, all those years ago, had simply begged the creature to stop, and when it saw me, it did. I asked it one year if I could do the same thing. It only replied,
"You are mine."
I researched it through college and beyond, and when I had enough money to hire people, they researched it too. I couldn't be very specific with them about my reasons, of course, but I could offer grants to religious studies students, hire paranormal investigators, demonologists. 6 solid years of research yielded nothing, not a damn thing. Every ancient society, every dead culture I could study, I did, end to end, to the extent that there was some buzz that I'd be nominated for a Nobel for advancing the study so far. Nobody had heard of the thing. In college, I had the idea to go back and ask Mr. Slater about it, but he looked at me like I was crazy. I wondered how much time it had spent with him, since his life wasn't so great. What if that was the first night he'd encountered it? What if the thing had been with him for years and was on a downswing, taking things away instead of granting them? I'd never know. I was 35, with another Halloween approaching, a wife I loved, and my first child on the way, and that thing was the final straw. I couldn't have this thing in my life with a child in the house. This year, I was going to ask it for an exit. This year, I received something worse than a black postcard in the mail. This year, the afternoon of what I'd come to think of as visitation night, we had to rush to the hospital. Complications. Our baby was lost. It made no sense. My wife was perfectly healthy, and everything had been going fine. But there was no heartbeat, no sign of life. My wife was inconsolable. She had to be sedated, and even as they were putting the IV into her, she was crying out, asking,
"Will this hurt the baby? You can't give me these drugs. It'll cause complications."
My wife refused treatment, insisted that they were mistaken. We went home, the doctor pulling me aside to suggest that we let her rest a few days, then discuss inducing labor to finish the procedure. Finish the procedure. Just like that, our baby had somehow progressed from human being to benign growth. A mole to be scraped off, a boil to be lanced. All of those cardboard pumpkins hanging on the wall, smiling, calm. That stupid friendly skeleton on the door. They were the only witnesses. That night it came. Slow, silent, and sad-eyed. It sat at the foot of the couch where I was sleeping. My wife wanted to be alone, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't notice that I'd drifted off to sleep, but 1 minute it wasn't there, and then it was. Laying a hand on my calf, I didn't feel fear. I only felt empty.
I am ready.
Just take something and go, I said.
I am ready to end our bargain.
I was speechless. It felt strange. Another gut punch, another loss, another branch pruned from the tree of my life. I wanted to dictate terms. I wanted a safe exit, but once the baby was gone, I wanted it back. I wanted it to continue. I needed this thing, this surety.
I will give you your child.
What?
I will give you your child. I will take it. I will be the surrogate. Tomorrow you will be a father.
It wasn't a question or an offer. But my wife can't...
She will remember nothing.
I don't want this. You can't have it, my child. You can't. It's done.
Have I ever asked your permission for anything? The bargain ends because I say so. You are mine. Tomorrow, you will be a father.
It led me to the bedroom, made me open the door, made sure my wife... I can't describe the look I saw on her face, how she instinctively curled her arms over her stomach, how her feral glare burned through me until it came into the room. Then she froze and softened and looked at me, her lower jaw working, trying to get out a question, to ask me what was happening. It mounted her, stretching its arms out and wrapped those rubbery cold fingers around her wrists, pinned her legs down, didn't bother to cover her mouth because there was nobody to disturb with her screams. All I could do was watch, and I knew what it felt like. I knew exactly what she was going through. I chuckled in spite of myself that she'd never be able to hold the pain of this childbirth over my head. That single tooth tore her nightshirt open. That sphincter mouth traced kisses down her collarbone, between her breasts, suckling at her nipples until milk started to flow. Then it moved lower, elbows and shoulders dislocating so it could keep her pinned down. Not that she was fighting at this point, only staring at me with wide eyes, panting for air until the thing's mouth reached her thighs.
How does it feel?
It asks this as it cuts deep into the inner thigh, flesh and fat zippering apart, its tongue probing into the fresh wound.
How are you doing?
The thing wouldn't want an answer even if there was one. It only wants screams.
This is going to be worth it. You're going to love next year. This will make it worth the having.
Its head stretched thin, narrowing impossibly at the mouth, the entire face a tubular beak, a hard proboscis that poked at her vulva until it found its way inside. She screamed then, my wife. I couldn't do nothing but watch it root, the heat of its palms pushing her legs apart, The cold, slow rivulets of saliva dripping down her sides like icy syrup, washed away with the regular and slow pulses of her hot blood. That single tooth in her lower jaw, barbed and curved. That awful knowing smile from the pucker of its mouth as it comes up for air, slowly retracting its head to stare at me. Neck bent round the wrong way, slime coating its face. It made that hideous ring mouth into an imitation of a smile.
It's a boy.
It plunged its beak into her stomach, slicing through skin and fat and muscle, splaying her open. Cold gray slime oozed down her, mixing and pulling with her blood. That ringing in my ears isn't ringing. It's her screaming for the baby, screaming my name, cursing me, even as it lowered its face to her flayed abdomen and forced its head inside. Its back lurched up once, twice, as if taking great gulping swallows, and then it came, orgasmic shudders rippling through its spine as it straightened and stood up from the bed, staring at me, one hand cupping its swollen belly. It caressed my cheek, pushed a finger inside my mouth, pressed until my knees buckled. It lowered me onto the bed beside my wife. Tears streamed from her eyes, her organs warm and wet against my stomach. I reached out to her, stupidly, tried to cradle her in my arms. The thing stood above us and arched its back, convulsing, straining, eyes swelling until the veins that laced them burst and bloody tears flowed. It straddled her, crouching lower and lower until it positioned its vagina above my wife's open torso. It pushed until it came, until a child came. A membranous sac slid out of its dilated opening and landed inside my wife. I saw through the pale pink membrane its face, calm and serene, sleeping. I woke to her screams, my wife clutching my arm and saying,
It's time! Holy shit, it's time! They were wrong! My water broke! Do you feel it?
I climbed from the bed, soaked, but not in her blood, but amniotic fluid. Aside from that, the sheets were clean in a way my memory could never be. And we drove to the hospital, and I strode through the doors like a champion, pushing her wheelchair through the throng gathered there. I stared at the confused faces of the nurses and doctors and told them it was time. They checked signs. They double-checked charts. They made me sign waivers promising not to sue over all the stillbirth confusion.
These things happen sometimes. We will, of course, be paying you for your pain and suffering in exchange for...
I told them to shut the fuck up and do their job. We could discuss it later. There would be a later. There would be a rest of our lives, and that's all that mattered. You are all that mattered. Our son. My son. Mine. I'm telling you all of this now before you understand it, because I never want you to hear it again. I never want you to know about any of this. It's gone. It's gone and it won't come back. It always keeps its promises. You're in my arms with your perfect eyes, your ruddy cheeks, and I love you. More than anything. More than everything. I'm laughing at your gurgles, your tiny nose twitching, your perfect little ruby lips when they stretch into that smile, that same kind of goofy smile your mother gets, your happy little gummy mouth that looks perfect and normal, except for that one thing that confused the doctors. That single, smooth, tiny tooth breaking through your lower gums. Doctors say this isn't unusual. They call them natal teeth. I know better. You yawn wide, showing me that tiny ivory blade. And you stare at me placidly. And I can only think, worth the having.
Chilling tales for dark nights.